Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast, longtime friend of the JRE and direct good friend of Joe Rogan himself is Lex Fridman. And if you didn't know, Lex Fridman recently sat down with, you guessed it, Donald Trump. And only Lex Fridman, out of all the interviews I've seen with Trump, from Theo, Paul, streamers, only this one guy has called out Trump for what he said about Joe Rogan. Very interesting little conversation. A little bit of tension in this part of the conversation, but not much. Trump's being cool, being very cool about it. Could have went in like he usually does, but he's become very cool about it. Maybe it's because they now have a mutual friend. Now, let's get into this clip.
They've done it in Florida. It's very good.
Do you know anything about psychedelics? So I'm not a drug guy, but I recently did ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that speak to sort of the health benefits and the spiritual benefits of these different psychedelics.
Right.
I think we would probably have a better world if everybody in Congress took some mushrooms, perhaps. Now I know you stay away from all of that stuff. I know also veterans use it for dealing with PTSD and all that kind of stuff. So it's great, and it's interesting that you're thinking about being more accepting of some of these drugs, which don't just have a recreational purpose, but a medical purpose, a treatment purpose.
So we put out a statement today. We're going to put out another one probably next week, be more specific, although I think it's pretty specific. And we'll see how that all goes. That's a referendum coming up in some states, but it's coming up, and we'll see how it does. I will say it's been very hard to beat it. You take a look at the numbers, it's been very hard to beat it. So I think it'll generally pass, but you want to do it in a safe way.
Speaking of marijuana, let me ask you about my good friend Joe Rogan. So you had a bit of tension with him. So when he said nice things about RFK Jr., I think you've said some not so nice things about Joe, and I think that was a bit unfair. And as a fan of Joe, I would love to see you do his podcast, because he is legit the greatest conversationalist in the world. So what's the story behind the tension?
I don't think there was any tension, and I've always liked him, but I don't know him. I mean, I only see him when I walk into the arena with Dana. Mm-hmm. And I shake his hand. I see him there, and I think he's good at what he does, but I don't know about doing his podcast. I mean, I guess I'd do it, but I haven't been asked, and I'm not asking them, I'm not asking anybody.
It sounds like a challenging negotiation situation.
No, it's not. It's not really a negotiation. And he's sort of a liberal guy, I guess, from what I understand. But he likes Kennedy. This was before I found this out, before Kennedy came in with us. He's going to be great. Bobby's going to be great. But I like that he likes Kennedy. I do too. He's a different kind of a guy, but he's got some great things going. And I think he's going to be beyond politics. I think he could be quite influential in taking care of some situations that you probably would agree should be taken care of.
The Joe Rogan post is an example. I would love to get your psychology about behind the tweets and the posts on Truth. Are you sometimes being intentionally provocative, or are you just speaking your mind? And are there times where you regret some of the truths you've posted?
Yeah, I do. I mean, but not that often, honestly. I do a lot of reposting. The ones you get in trouble with are the reposts, because you find down deep they're into some group that you're not supposed to be reposting. You don't even know if those groups are good, bad, or indifferent. But the reposts are the ones that really get you in trouble. When you do your own words, it's sort of easier. But the reposts go very quickly. And if you're going to check every single little symbol, and I don't know, it's worked out pretty well for me, I tell you. It's truth is very powerful, truth. And it's my platform, and it's been very powerful, very, very powerful. Goes everywhere. I call it my typewriter, that's actually my typewriter.
What are you doing usually when you're composing a truth? Like, are you chilling back on a couch,
couches, beds,
Okay.
a lot of different things. I mean,
Like late at night and just
I'd
laying-
like to do some later night. You know, I'm not a huge sleeper, but whenever I do them, you know, past like 3:00,
Mhm.
they criticize you the next day. Trump was up, truthing. Okay, Trump was truthing at 3:00 in the morning, and there should be no problem with that. And then when you think about time zones, how do they know that you're like, you know, in a time zone like an Eastern zone?
I let that run a little long, and I played it a little long at the beginning. Very interesting that Lex is willing to talk to him about psychedelics, and they're touching on that whole realm of things, saying that everybody in Congress should have to do something like that. I agree. I've had that conversation before with friends, but you got to beware with that realm. It doesn't always wake up the most peaceful part of yourself. It can wake up all sorts of things in different people. So you never know. You know, someone like Gavin Newsom, he could have a come to Jesus moment, or he could have a I am God moment. And we don't want to see that kind of thing take place in the world. But more so past that, the topic of the conversation here, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, what was that? Get out of here. You're not a real Joe Rogan fan. And as much as this is a Joe Rogan channel, a lot of the time it's a Trump channel. I'll be honest. I talk about my biases all the time. I like to cover some Trump. I really do. Love when Joe Rogan talks about him. Love when a lot of people talk about him. Love when he's in the news. Love that he's running for president. Love that he's about to win against Kami Kamala. So if you're not down with that, hey, no problem. Kick rocks. But I found this very, very interesting. The fact that he said there's no tension after he said that. And I also find it very ballsy of Lex Fridman to say that he found what he said unfair, because rarely is Trump, especially online in an interview, around somebody who is telling him something he did was unfair. I found that very ballsy of Lex. Love that he did that. You know, and I've covered this before. I don't particularly think it was unfair. I think it's just what Trump's going to do, especially if you're saying, you know, again, so many people in the comments when I covered this whole topic were like, he didn't endorse him. That's not an endorsement. Hey, if you're the biggest voice in the world and you say someone makes the most sense to be president, sorry, you just endorsed them. Like, there's a news cycle going. There's people like me. There's huge networks. Everybody's going to cover it. You know better. He knows better. He knows he's Joe Rogan. He's not completely inept to the fact that he's Joe Rogan. He knows. He knew what was going to happen. I'm sure he didn't think Trump was going to respond like he did. And only when Trump responded did he walk it all back and say it wasn't an endorsement. But now that they have a common friend, besides Dana White, now that they have Robert F. Kennedy in common, and Trump loves what Kennedy's about, wants to bring him in on his administration. Joe Rogan loves what Kennedy's about, brought him on his podcast. It's very interesting. And then on top of that, Lex Fridman seems like he wants to negotiate something, because Lex Fridman, you know, as much as I'm not a partaker in his podcast all the time, he is sitting back trying to actually have Trump on that podcast. I think even Lex realizes, although Lex is one of the big podcasts, he is a big podcast, he understands that Trump being on Joe Rogan's podcast is a whole different ball game, and he wants to see that happen as well, as so many of us do. But Trump seemed a little, he's like, I guess I'd do it, you know? And then he's like, I'm not asking. You know, I was like, whoa, that's where, you know, there's a little tension with what he said and what Joe said. There's a little bit of tension. He's like, I'm not asking. And we all know Joe is sitting back, and he's also in the same ballpark of I'm not asking. And, you know, he's famously said about 2 years ago, oh, I don't want to help him. But in that 2 years, he said so many things that are good about Trump. I have a whole playlist called Trump, where it's pretty much just all Joe Rogan talking positively about Trump, negatively about Biden, negatively about Harris. So it sounds like he's changed his tune, but the one step he won't take is actually doing the interview. I'm going to do another episode on that, because there's a lot more to that, I think. But interesting. Lex Fridman doing Doing good work, man. The fact that he's willing to interview Trump, the fact that he's willing to sit down with Trump and not do this gotcha type of interviewing, which Lex Fridman never does, but a lot of people did expect that from him. There's this guy, I don't know if you know this guy. I should actually find the post. This guy, what's his name? Oh, it might be right here. You know what? Let me switch up here, because I commented on it. Yeah, I made that comment there. Yeah. Kyle's never heard a real conversation. Kyle's like, why didn't you attack him? Because Kyle Kalinske, I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. Kyle Kalinske, he wanted Lex Fridman. He was very disappointed in the interview. He's like, he seems like a good dude, means well, but his interview with Trump was completely embarrassing. Trump said countless factual false things, and he just sat there and didn't check him. If you're going to do an interview with a former president and leading candidate, you have to, what was else he said? You have to be prepared on policy. And here's the thing to what Kyle Kalinske is saying. He's 100% wrong. Lex Fridman does not do that type of interview with anybody. He'll push back on things that he wants to talk about, but he's not sitting there trying to say, hey, I just caught you lying 17 times. Lex Fridman is not CNN. He's not MSNBC, where he's going to be like, I caught 15 lies in the past 4 minutes, and we're going to address those lies today, Mr. President. Didn't realize you were a liar. He's not going to do that to Donald Trump. So I'm glad guys like this never get the opportunity to interview presidential candidates, because they're vile people. And I think they're a little bit of I think they're hidden. They're like hidden YouTubers. People who are mainstream, but they seem like they're YouTubers. Maybe you don't know about that. There's a lot of those people. There's a lot of people. They have subscription services, some of them. Some of them act like they're all independent, but they're actually very much aligned with the mainstream media. All you have to do is check their talking points and what they cover, and you'll see it. But I think he's one of them, quite honestly. But again, props to Lex Fridman for calling out Trump on what he said about Rogan, and hopefully this leads to something, because Lex Fridman traveled to Donald Trump. I believe you can tell by the American flags, and there's people walking in the background, seem like Secret Service in Lex's view. But hopefully Lex can actually work something out, because Lex is willing to talk to Trump. Obviously, he's good friends with Rogan, and if they can make that happen, that would be a glorious thing to see, because that's the one thing that's missing, right? Trump has got Tulsi, he's got RFK, he's got Elon Musk, another friend of Rogan, Tulsi, a good friend of Rogan. You know what I mean? He has all these people that are Rogan's friends. The one thing he's missing is that Rogan interview. And it's very important for both of them. It's important for Trump. And I don't think people realize it's important for Rogan as well. It's not like it's going to break Rogan or anything if he doesn't do it, but it is very important that he has that interview, It's important to help America when you can. That's what I'll say about that. Anyways, guys, just wanted to show you that little tidbit. Found it very, very interesting. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. And other than that, I'm out.